Thank you for joining us today. I am your host, Jason Hopcus, and I am so thrilled to have this conversation. Today, I've got my co host, Amy Staley, with us, who is a licensed clinical social worker, as well as a guest that I've been vastly interested in having a conversation with, Jayme Harker. Jayme is a recent graduate with her master's in social work and a mother of 5 here in Colorado, and really interested to having a conversation around parenting and navigating the ups and downs of parenthood in today's world, and how you do things differently when you have children that have different needs. So welcome, Amy and Jayme. It's a pleasure to have you guys here today.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
So as we get into this, Amy, I know you and Jayme have a personal connection and have worked together for quite some time. I'd love for you to give us your perspective on why it was important for us to have this conversation with Jayme now, aside from what I just shared, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Jayme, thank you so much for being here and for agreeing to come on and talk with us today. Jayme and I first met in 2020. She was an MSW intern. At that time, I was working in a school, and she came and worked with me. And actually, Jayme, I'm kind of giggling to myself. I'm sitting here thinking of all the videos we made sending home to kids, and how you were like, "Oh, I guess I'm going to have to get over being on the video all the time." And here we are again. I was
On
like,
the
"Oh,
video.
It was
yes,
preparation and planning.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly." So Jayme, as Jason shared, is a mom of 5, and so she completed her master's in social work program over 4 years. And so she would go to class for a year, and then the following year have an internship, as she was doing it part-time. And so I was lucky enough to be her supervisor for her first internship. And from that moment, I gave Jayme a lot of praise and feedback, because I think she just did a beautiful job of integrating what she learned in the classroom, integrating the education, and getting her master's in social work, along with the skill set that she brought as being a parent. I feel like she's really authentic in engaging with people, because she brings that human experience and that relatability into clinical practice, while also connecting with parents and connecting with others, just person to person. And I know I've even talked to her about my own parenting, and utilized her as a resource, because I feel like she is so relatable and is approachable. So I'm personally feel lucky that Jayme considered and did accept kind of coming on the show with us, to talk a little bit more about her experiences as an MSW and as a mom. Jayme, I'm confident there's pieces that I'm leaving out in regards to your professional career. Is there anything else you would want to share with folks to introduce yourself as we get started here?
I think you pretty much covered it. I took a long break. I had my first child in 2007. And so I spent some time as solely a stay-at-home parent until about 2019, when I decided to go back for my MSW degree. So it was a big life shift for all of us, but it's turned out really well. So I had experience as a parent. Now I'm getting back into the field of social work again.
I love it.
I-
Well, it's so great to have you guys both here today. And as I mentioned earlier, the conversation we really want to have is navigating the ups and downs of parenting in today's world. I mean, as we know, there is no, go-to manual for how to do this, and especially being a mom of 5, Jayme, tell us a little bit about the differences among your kids, and how parenting them the same might not be the right approach to meeting their needs and meeting them where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So having 5 kids is a lot. I actually was the oldest of 5 kids, so I feel like I had some idea of what I was getting into. But at the same time, the world is so different, and things are so different now, and it's different with having a perspective as a parent, that having all of these 5 different people with different personalities, different interests, different challenges, and different strengths, it can be a lot to manage. So each of them have great things that they bring to the table, and all of them have different growth edges that we're working to navigate and learn about. I shared with Jason that 3 of my kiddos have an ADHD diagnosis, and all 3 of them present very differently. And so learning how to give each one of them what they what they need, even though they all have the same diagnosis. It's even that is different within each one of them. So learning how to advocate, learning what they need, it can be a real challenge as a parent.
Absolutely. You know, Jayme, when I called you up and asked if you would consider joining us on the podcast, I felt like pretty quickly you were like, oh, absolutely, I would definitely be into that. Can you tell us a little bit about what drew you to wanting to join this conversation with us today, and what feels important to you about being here today?
Yeah, well, I'm excited about the podcast. I know it's just starting, but I'm excited about what the work you guys are doing, and just the name of the podcast of Nobody's Perfect. I think just that name really draws me in personally, because I think there's so many expectations placed on us as parents that we get it right the first time. You know, we know a lot more about what impact we have on our kids. So I think sometimes that pressure to really always be doing the right thing, saying the right thing, not getting triggered and maybe doing things that we regret later, it can be really heavy as a parent. And then managing that in a place where we do have connection, but we're also doing this a lot in our own bubble. I just really appreciate the idea of talking about our struggles, our successes, in a way that we're not expecting perfection out of ourselves is so important.
Well, and when we started this, I mean, this is built upon 5 years of work of meeting with youth in our For Youth by Youth initiative and parents. And I have to say, perfectionism was the one word that was kind of the thread that pulled through all of this. And, whether you're a youth or you're an adult parent or not, we all have this high need to show up and be perceived as we did it perfectly. And the reality is there is no perfection, hence the name Nobody's Perfect. What I love about this conversation we're having is just the rawness of being able to admit that perfection is an illusion. It's not a reality. But help me from your lens better understand this concept of perfectionism and how, I know you have to engage with other parents all the time. Like, let's normalize the conversation. Then what you're experiencing is not unique to you, that anybody and everybody might be feeling the same way.
Yeah. Well, I think from the time that you have these little babies come into your life, there's this narrative that goes on around you and in your head of like, you only have this short amount of time with them. You only get these 18 years. I remember when my oldest turned 9, it was I don't know if you guys heard of the term halftime. Like, you're at halftime, you're already halfway done with the time with your kids. And it felt like so much pressure to get everything you need done. And when my oldest turned 9, I had that thought going through my head of, have I done enough? Have I prepared her enough? Like, have I given her all the skills that she needs? And so that constant expectation of, we only get this one chance and we better not mess it up, I can weigh heavy. And I've heard that from other people, as well as feeling that within myself, that you get, the short amount of time with your kids. And I don't think that's actually reality, though. My kids are getting older and we're looking ahead to college, and I'm seeing the relationship that we're forming beyond them as children. And I realize we have a long time together. It's not
Life
all
goes
gonna
on after
have
high
to be
school.
done. Yeah, by the time they turn 18, it's not like we're going to turn them out and never have any connection beyond that. And so just taking that pressure off a little bit helps with, I think, that idea that you've got one shot to make it right.
I feel like that's really interesting, because as we were preparing for this, and Jason and I talked about a couple of questions or pieces we wanted to bring up, that wasn't on my radar. But I as a parent myself, even when you just said that out loud, like my heart was like, oh, 9, halftime. Like, you're right. There is a lot of pressure of they're only young for this amount of time. They're only, going to want to experience X, Y, and Z. Enjoy the hugs while you have them, because they're not going to want to do, all of these things that society tells us about parenting and about our limited time. I think that really does add to the pressure of perfectionism. And I really appreciate that reflection, because it's honestly something I hadn't necessarily thought of, but I do think that contributes to our perfection and that pressure piece. With that being said, what do you think are pieces that would be important for us as parents to think of to do our best to give ourselves breaks with that. I mean, I think parents, we put just as much pressure on ourselves as potentially society puts on us, or, potentially the perfectionism pressure that our kids are feeling. What is your thought on how to acknowledge that to yourself, or recognize, ooh, when is perfectionism maybe what's driving what I'm doing, or this limited time driving versus, how I'm wanting to show up for my kids? I don't know. Do you have a
Yeah.
thought on that?
Yeah. So what's coming to my mind is in my graduate program, when we talked about the therapeutic relationship, there was this idea of rupture and repair. And I felt a lot of pressure last year, my internship, when I was starting to do one-on-one individual therapy, and I had to do everything right. I had to say the right thing all the time. I had to, be perfect, have the right answers, never mess up. And something that I learned in my classes and my internship was there's a lot of growth, and sometimes the most growth and the most healing that people have is in that rupture and repair. And so with our kids, we're never going to be able to be perfect. That's just an unrealistic standard. So how can we use those opportunities where maybe we aren't perfect or we don't get it right as an opportunity for growth in our relationship, to sit down with our kids and be like, hey, I messed up and I'm really sorry. And I've seen those moments when with my own kids where I've had to sit down with them and say, like, hey, I didn't like how I acted yesterday, and I didn't handle that the way I wanted to. And how that, like, not being perfect, but using that to foster a conversation with them, creates to even stronger relationships and more trust with us. So using those opportunities when we're not perfect to build our relationship with our kiddos, I think is really important.
I think even as early as last week, I had a meeting with a youth advisory council here locally. And what I took away from meeting with these really bright young people was the element of how they want to have conversations, healthier conversations with their parents. And there's often this disconnect. And what came up and was sort of reiterated in multiple feedback that I received was this element of parents often don't share enough about their own journey or their own experiences, that kind of normalize, hey, I made a lot of mistakes too going along the way, and I'm not sitting at this place on high today telling you how to do everything the right way. And what I really see validated from youth today is them wanting their parents to talk to them. I think there's an element of, when I look at where some of the disconnects are created in parents, and I know there are a lot of parents out there feeling like, I don't know how to connect with my youth. I think there's that terrible T word in the middle of it, technology, that has driven a wedge in so much of our conversation. And the thing that I'm acutely aware of is, as parents, most of us are adapters to technology versus our kids are native to technology. And there is a huge disconnect between what our kids know and what we know. And I find that chasm between it often becomes, a limitation in parents showing up to really effectively meet their kids where they are, because they don't understand. And frankly, I believe there's some fabulous conversation to be had around the fact that I don't understand this, and can you teach me and bring me further along, versus the other way around. How have you seen, I know that was a long-winded way of getting to, how have you seen technology playing a role in connection or disconnection in your family?
Sure. It is a very different world. I mean, my kids, I think it's called like a millennial, where you're kind of in that in between generation of where you didn't grow up with the internet, but you started to have it maybe in high school or college.
Right.
Like right in that generation. So my kid's favorite story is that I learned how to type in 6th grade on a typewriter. Like, I went to school with a room full of typewriters and learned how to type. And they're like, oh my gosh, you are so old. But then by the time I was in high school, my dad was on the forefront of like technology. So we did end up having the internet and like different ways to start connecting on time or online. So it's like this really weird position of like, yeah, we didn't have technology, but then we were kind of getting introduced to it. And I think it's hard because, a lot of things in parenting, we rely on our own experiences and we give that to our kids of like, here's what it was like for me, but not having any social media or really even like anything close to the technology that they have today can really create a barrier and like, I don't know what this experience is like for you. Can you tell me what it's like? A conversation that I've had with my kids surrounding social media, because as a parent, it's hard. Like, I feel like the research is coming out more now, but when my kids first turned teenagers, it wasn't as much there. So we're kind of going on like our gut and what we're hearing. And do we let these kids have social media? And so something that I had a conversation around my kids with is like, social media is hard for me to manage. Like, I don't know how I expect you at like 12 with an undeveloped brain to be able to manage all these things that are hard for me. So I think being open with them about like how technology affects us, but then also asking them like, how does this affect you? And also, learning from them. When I started my grad program, I had to ask my kids to teach me how to make a PowerPoint. And they thought it was so funny, but like they were willing to get in there with me and help me. And so I think like just being open to learning from them as well helps them feel some value in what they can offer to us as parents too. And it becomes less of a one-way relationship.
And I think that's so important for anybody to listen to, really, again, not a novel concept here, but really realizing that, communication is a two-way street. And there may be some places that your teen or your youth is further down the path than you are with understanding. I think there's a phenomenal opportunity to learn. And I'm recognizing that, not all conversations are as easy as we're making them out to be here. But I think there is a great opportunity here that if you enter the conversation from the space of, I want to know more about what what I know about the human psyche is most of us want to be heroes. So if you can give somebody, your child the opportunity to share what they know in a way that helps you grow and learn, like, I think there's a pretty interesting connection point there. The thing that it sparked for me, and knowing that you've got 5 kids and you're adapting into technology with them, help me understand, how have you guys navigated setting healthy boundaries around the use of technology in your house? Because I know that comes up a lot.
That has been, I think, one of the biggest challenges we have faced. We had a rule that our kids couldn't get a cell phone until middle school. And so for me, I was like, you don't really need a cell phone that does all this other stuff. Well, what I started to realize is, I remember being on the phone, we'd pick up the landline and tie up our phones all night talking to our friends. And I think that was an important part of my development with social relationships. And excuse me, I had to come to the conclusion that looks differently for this generation. They're doing that social connecting, not on the landlines on their phone, but through texting. So how could we give our kids the opportunity to have that social connection and have that important piece of development while also protecting them from some of the really big challenges, and I would even say dangers that can be online. So we sat down with our kids. So far, it's only really been our older 2. My 3rd just started middle school, so he's just entering into, what it's like to have a phone, and talk to them and just had a really open dialogue with them about the social media pieces. Their friends were starting to get social media, and we pulled out the research. Okay, like, this is what it's showing. This is what it could possibly affect you in this way. This is the effect it could possibly have on your brain. And for us, and this may not be the right answer for everyone, we made a hard rule that social media wasn't going to be an option in middle school. I feel like middle school is one of the most challenging times in a kid's life. And so introducing that in middle school just seemed like it was going to present more of a challenge. Then we opened up that conversation again when they got to high school. And at this time, both my older kids are like, no, we've like gone this long without it. We don't want it. But it's constantly a conversation that we readdress. So it's not just a one and done, but it's an ongoing conversation and getting their input about like, how might social media affect you if you have it? How might it affect you if you don't have it? And so that's been really important to get their input on that as well.
So you setting and maintaining really healthy boundaries has been value added. Sorry, Amy.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I really appreciate your perspective and kind of the way that your family has discussed this value so openly. And like you said, it's not a one and done, it's an ongoing conversation. I'm also aware for some folks, because of this perfectionism pressure, because of, other stressors in life, time, things along those lines, we might not know how to start some of these conversations. And I'm just curious, when you're talking about your vulnerability when you don't know something with your kids, when you're talking about ways that you're sitting down and engaging them in conversation and engaging them to use critical thinking skills about how they want to relate to social media or engage with it or not. For some folks, it might be like, where do we start? And, I think we've had a lot of conversations, outside of this podcast about how parents and youth at times are just struggling to kind of start the conversation, struggling to maybe hear each other, talking about the exact same topic, but potentially both walking away with kind of a different perspective. Do you have any suggestions on conversations that are an easy starting place for folks? For a parent who might be like, okay, I want to try this. I want to try and be more vulnerable, but where would I start with that? Or for a youth that might want to engage with their parents and try to talk to their parents about their perspective differently. Again, I know Jason brought up that you probably talk to a lot of other parents. So whether that be from conversations from, people that you engage with or yourself, just where should somebody start? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, what's coming up for me, and this may not be a specific topic to introduce things, but I think just being vulnerable and honest that it may be a little clumsy, it may be a little awkward. These are new conversations. So I remember, getting ready to have your talk about like puberty and texting that with my kids. And when we sat down, I told them like, this is not something that I have a lot of experience with. So I'm going to be a little awkward. I'm going to be a little clumsy, but can we push through and get through these? Like, can we push through the awkwardness so that it becomes more comfortable? And so I think just sometimes, naming it, like this may feel a little different. We're not used to having conversations like that, and just naming that to start with can kind of bring the tension down a little and also eliminate that need for it to look perfect, because everybody's on the same page that it feels a little bit awkward to first start.
Yeah. And I guess I'm curious too, you talked about this a little bit earlier about how all 5 of your kids may or may not have different needs. Even 3 that might have a similar diagnosis, you might need to engage with them differently. So when we're bringing these pieces up, how do you adjust the way that you're engaging with your kids depending on their needs when you're approaching these conversations?
Yeah, that is so true that all of them are different and they have different personalities. There's some of my kids that I'll be like, how was your day? And they'll just be like, fine, move on. And I have a couple other ones that I'll ask how their day was. And 3 hours later, I'm like, okay, I think I got it.
Did you miss anything?
Yeah.
I think I know every single detail of what happened in your day today. So just recognizing that different personalities may need different things. So some of my kids, I'm thinking of one in particular, just really need some time to decompress after school, to where if I start bombarding them with questions, they're going to shut down. And so I've learned, and it's taken a while to learn, that they may need 30 minutes before I ask them anything about their day. And they may need like really specific questions that day. Oh, tell me, like, how was English today? Did you turn in that assignment? How did it go? Who did you eat lunch with? They need like really specific questions to get the conversation going. Some of those other kids I discussed, they'll get in the car and they'll immediately need to unload. So just preparing myself to be like, okay, what do I need to do beforehand to be able to like take all this information in without like zoning out, or maybe, not being fully present with them. So just getting to know that like it's not going to look the same for each of your kids. Some of them, they don't want to have the conversation, some of these harder conversations with anybody around. They want it to be really private. So, hey, can we go over into this other room, or could we go on a drive to have this conversation? Whereas other of them, they want everybody's input. So just really taking the time to learn what each individual kid needs it can be really stressful. That can be overwhelming, but I think it's really important.
Well, and what's coming up for me, because I mean, I'm in awe of you. You sound like Supermom doing this all so beautifully. You know, if I'm listening and I'm really struggling myself, and that's come out of a lot of the data about how many parents are struggling with their own mental health challenges or issues, or I've got a really demanding job and maybe I don't have the time to engage or be present in the way that I want to. Help us understand from your perspective, how does somebody that's listening navigate those bandwidth issues of still showing up and having the important conversation when really maybe they're struggling up to show up for themselves first?
Yeah, that hits so hard for me right now. I know on Monday, there was just so much going on in my household. It was so crazy. And having ADHD myself, I got really overstimulated. And I went up to my room and cried for about 5 minutes because I was like, I'm just so overstimulated. And just recognizing that, I mean, like, I gotta step out for a second because I'm so overstimulated. That's important. But I think also, I've seen a lot of people talk about how we're kind of this bridge generation of like we're healing our own triggers and trying to do better for our kiddos. And so just taking the time to learn like what are our own triggers? Like what if like one of my kids does something that I may not even recognize triggers something in me from like childhood or an experience that I've had, that I may react in a way that has nothing to do with my child, but has to do with something that's being triggered in me. So if therapy is accessible, I think that's a great way to start to learn. Our kids bring up so much. Like I remember having my oldest and seeing some things in her perfectionism, especially, that I'm like, I don't know how to fix that in myself. Like, how am I supposed to know how to like help my child navigate this? And so like reaching out for, maybe support through therapy, recognizing that taking time for ourselves to build up that bandwidth, whatever that looks like for you, how you engage in self-care. Is that yoga? Is that working out? Is that spending time with friends? Is that recognizing that like, hey, my kid needs 30 minutes to compress at this time. I may need 30 minutes after homework and dinner and that chaos to just take a minute and reset myself so that I can re-engage for bedtime. And so I think just learning what those triggers are and learning how we can manage them and practice our own self-care can help us to be more present and more engaged with our kids.
Well, frankly, it sounds like a way to normalize, what they're going through your own experience, which honestly sounds like a place to connect from.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I was just gonna bring that up because I think you're doing a beautiful job of talking about how you are vulnerable with your kids as a way for modeling some of these, but also recognizing that there might be times that we need a minute to kind of get ourselves together before we're able to model that, and
Right.
allowing ourselves that space, right? So
Yeah.
it's also what I'm hearing from you is, how do I honor myself? How do I take care of myself and heal pieces for me so that I can show up and be my best self and I can model that I do yoga or I do these pieces, but also being aware of what's for us to own as adults and hold, versus then kind of sharing everything with our kids, right, and them holding those pieces as
Absolutely.
well, because I think once that door opens, I could see it being a slippery slope as well. Like, oh, today, I'm having a rough day, and that's okay. How do we name that? But potentially be aware of kind of holding that space for ourselves.
Absolutely. So we this is a little bit personal, but my parents both passed away about 7 years ago. And it was a really tough time in our family. And I was struggling with how much do I show my kids? Like, how much emotion do I show my kids? Obviously, the times of like more raw grief, I sheltered them from, but there would be times when my kids would come up to me and be like, "Are you okay? Like, you seem sad." And I realized like if I told them I'm fine, don't worry about it, I was teaching them not to trust their inner voice and their own empathy that they were reading of other people by lying to them and being like, "Oh, I'm actually fine," even though they could clearly tell I wasn't okay. So how did I model being like, "You know what, thank you so much for asking. Today I'm a little bit sad, and like here's how I'm going to take care of it, and like this is not yours to own. This is how I'm going to take care of myself," but also not necessarily hiding away from them, like that we're humans and we have real feelings, and how do we manage those? Because I felt like, not to overuse the term gaslighting, but I felt like it was gaslighting a little bit to always just be like, I'm okay, I'm okay. And then they were learning not to trust what they were reading in other people.
Well,
Beautiful. Thank
I
you.
think this goes back to, and thank you for your empathy there, or your share there. You know, we're humans having a human experience. And I think that certain things happen in life and we immediately move in our heads that we've got to be a certain way or show up a certain way. You know, and I always laugh. You know, I've gotten very casual as I've gotten more comfortable in my own skin, and I laugh and say, if it doesn't have elastic pants, I'm not wearing it, although I do have on jeans today. But the reality is I think that there, as we evolve as adults, you know, we gravitate to being more comfortable in our own skin. And I think the more that we're able to do that in our own journey, the easier it is for us to model that in other people. So for anybody that's listening, again, I want to normalize, we are humans having a human experience. Like, and you two are parents and certainly would love the validation of, there is no chance you're going to do any of this perfectly. So like the fact that we put that pressure on ourselves from the get-go is so ludicrous to me, because it's not even real. Like it's not even possible.
Yeah. And I think recognizing that day to day, you know, you always want to be giving your best to your kids, and you want to be doing like the most that you can for them. But also recognizing that that doesn't look the same like day to day. Like there may be a day that the best I can give my kids is driving through Chick-fil-A for dinner. And that's like what I have to give that day. But I'm still like giving my best. Where like, you know, another day I may be able to make a whole homemade like meal and be really present and all of that. And that's my best that day. It's just not going to look the same every day, because as you said, like we're human and we can't be robots in this parenting experience. It's just not a reasonable expectation.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious too, Jayme, you know, one thing that just came up for me in thinking about this is, how have you noticed a difference in kind of some of your expectations, or what that might look like after you've gone through your master's program and you have your MSW versus, you know, parenting before? Because I know even when Jason just said, okay, you guys are both parents, you probably put a lot on yourself. I know for myself, I'm like, gosh, I have a master's in this. I should know what's going on with my kid's developmental stage right now, instead of being like, why are you crying? Can you just stop? So, I mean, I think that it just plays into that piece, right? That internal voice, the pressures that we put on ourselves.
Yeah.
But I'm curious if, and you've kind of brought it up a couple of times, of thinking of how you've compared things to, like, you know, the rupture component and repair. But is there anything else that came up for you, or that you've noticed that's been different for you as somebody who has a master's in social work?
Yeah. Well, I think, yes, I am like resonating so much when you say that, like you have a lot more expectations on yourself. Like, one of my kiddos was having just a rough day, and, you know, they went to the school counselor the other day, and I was so grateful for that. But I was also like, am I not doing enough to help them at home? And so like that expectation of like, I should know all of these things can be really overwhelming. And I remember one time I was in a class where we were talking about something with kids, and I thought, oh, I have really messed that up. And so I stayed after to talk to my professor for a minute, and she's like, that's okay. She's like, I mess up things all the time. And again, back to that rupture and repair, she's like, you just apologize. And she said, like, that's what will make the difference in like this generation going forward, is we own that. Like, we maybe don't always know better, but we're learning how to do better, and we can own it and like apologize to our kids and have that conversation with them. So I think, again, like, you know, I think it's easy to do, especially like now that I do have my master's, I feel like, oh, I should know everything. But I think any parent places unrealistic expectations on themselves. So I think it's just part of the gig of like, I should know all of this, and they're my child, I should know everything about them. And it's just not realistic.
Yeah,
Well,
no, I
and
mean, I
it's kind of
couldn't
even the
agree
same
more.
in relationships with your boss, with a partner, a spouse. Like, you know, there are always going to be those pieces of somebody else that we don't fully know, and we may not find out until something bad happens, or never. But I mean, it's just it doesn't. this conversation is not steeped in the reality that we're ever going to know everything about everybody,
Right.
or that we're ever going to actually show up and be perfect. One of the things I'd love for us to spend a few minutes talking about, I know you're helping us with a project at NAMI ADCO, specifically related to resources and the accessibility of resources. And we've talked a lot about how hard it is when somebody is struggling, whether it's yourself or your child or spouse, whatever, to get connected to resources in today's world. Like, tell me your experience about, the understanding of resources and getting connected to those in a time of challenge or struggle.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes to what Amy was talking about, is that, I did my internship at a school. And so I knew about IEPs, I knew about 504s, I had participated in that process. So when my kids started receiving ADHD diagnoses, I felt like I should know exactly how to handle this. I should know how to navigate. I should know exactly what to ask for. And it was, the process was so daunting, being in it from a personal place, and it was so challenging for me to navigate, that I realized that the system isn't always set up for us to know exactly what to do, or where to go. And sometimes we have too much information, where it's like you can look online and find a million different things, and how do you sort through all of that to get through maybe what's accurate, what's misinformation, what's going to be most applicable to your own situation. So it can get to the point where the information can be so overwhelming, it can shut us down, or it can be difficult to find. Like, it's all of those things at once. And that piece in and of itself, I think, can just cause a lot of, for me at least, like, discouragement in navigating the process. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but I just think
it does. But I think what's coming up is, like, if somebody doesn't have your education or background and they know that they've got things at home that they're dealing with, where do they start?
Yeah. And that is the hardest thing, I think, to just get started. Because I started recognizing some signs of ADHD in one of my kiddos. And it was like, wait, where do I go? Like, who do I talk to? Am I going to face 6-month wait lists? And so just finding a starting point can be so tricky, in our case, for what, and again, back to it looking different for each of our kids. It looked different for every one of my kids that got an ADHD diagnosis. One of them, we went to the doctor. One of them, we went to like a mental health place. One of them, we went straight to the psychologist for testing. So even in like something that should look the same, it looks different. And so, that's part of the reason I'm so excited about being a part of this project, is to hopefully make that easier, because as I'm sitting here like racking my brain for a good answer of where do you start, I mean, honestly, I don't really know.
There's not a good answer.
There's not a good answer. I want to give you like the cookie cutter, like, this is exactly what you do. But if I'm being completely honest, I don't actually know sometimes.
That's a great
answer.
Yeah,
I think that's important. And when I was bringing up the pressures that you maybe put on yourself after you got your master's, and some of my vulnerability with that, I think it's super important to normalize for folks, because I'm sitting here thinking like, oh, I should jot this down. Jayme just had a really great parenting tip, right? And as somebody listening, if they're like, oh, well, yeah, she's talking about that, she has her master's in social work, like, of course, those are great ideas. But I think all of us need to know, even when we have that education, even when we have these pieces, even when we're coming to the table, there's still these struggles. There's still these pieces that come up. There's still challenges in navigating the system. And so I want people to feel connected and joined with all of us in this conversation, and that all of us are struggling with some of these pieces, right? This is all of us as humans trying to navigate it, trying to figure it out. The amount of times, Jayme, I'm thinking when you and I were helping some families get connected to resources in the community, that you and I sat there and took turns making phone calls for 15, 20 minutes, just until we got one answer, so that we could give a family a one phone call instead of them spending that time, right? Like, trying to validate for folks that it might be exhausting, it might be overwhelming, but be persistent with it. Do your follow-up phone calls, follow up with your pediatrician. As you just shared, you had 3 different entryways in supporting your kiddos. And that's might be the reality of where things are at right now, right? I think that all of us have hopes for things to look a little bit different and there to be more accessibility. And we also know the system's really flooded. And so
I think that's
everyone
an
on the
important piece there.
side.
the system being flooded. I mean, again, to normalize things, to recognize that we have a system that is inundated with demand that it was never designed to meet. You know, I mean, I got 3 outreach emails this morning in doing the work that I do at NAMI. And, you know, frankly, it's people reaching out for support. And how do I get support in this time when I've got a really kind of acute situation going on, and not knowing exactly where to plug people in? Like, I have my list of resources, but I think what's different is I'm wanting us to shorten the process and the path to get somebody connected to something that can help them sooner rather than later. The thing that I'm sparked by in listening to both of you share your own vulnerabilities here as parents is, and I see this so often in parents, when my kid's struggling or they're a mirror for things that I see in myself, you know, really there's often a lot of denial around not supporting your kids sooner because it may, in your mind, reflect poorly on who you are as a parent or unhealed parts of yourselves. Can you guys talk a little bit more about that? Because I think there are a lot of parents who perhaps delay just out of their own station point in their story. Maybe they're not as healed in certain things as they need to be to show up to support their kids. Like, can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Jayme, if you're okay, I'll jump in real quick and then you can add to that. You know, I think an important piece of that, you know, when we think of trauma and the ways that trauma plays a role in our lives, oftentimes there are pieces of our own childhood, our own lives that we have kind of closed off, right? It might be sort of subconscious for us. So there might also be things that we might even see in our kids, and we might not even be aware that it's triggering something in us. We might not be aware that maybe still has a place in our brain and our body, in a way that we thought maybe we'd moved on from. And so I think there's pieces that what you're discussing there, Jason, when we notice something and yeah, I'm not really ready to deal with that for myself. So yeah, I'm going to pause on dealing with that for my kid. But there's also pieces that people might not even fully be in touch with themselves, that they've had an experience that's still sitting with them. Right. And they might see this in their kids easier than they see it in themselves. Right. There might be the opposite of like, let me get them help because something's going on there. Right. And I want to make sure that I get them the support they need, but they might not necessarily slow down and realize that is bringing something up for themselves. That's why I think this is so hard and complex. And, you know, Jayme, obviously feel free to jump in and add here, but I think this is kind of what you were alluding to of this generation of trying to heal ourselves so we can be present for our kids. And how times have changed with some of that. So Jayme, what would you add as far as what Jason's comment and question was there?
Well, yeah, I think what's coming up for me as you're talking about that, like healing ourselves as we're like helping our kids, is that experience can be so overwhelming. And if you maybe have a child with like extra challenges or, you know, even just life right now, you know, we faced a pandemic, we are facing like all these like global stressors of like inflation and like, you know, we are navigating so much as parents. And then if you have a kiddo that maybe needs some extra support and you're trying to offer that themselves, like this process can be so overwhelming that you may not feel like you have the bandwidth to really take care of it all because you're just trying to survive. And I think so many of us are just like in survival mode right now of like, oh my gosh, like groceries are so much more like they're so much more expensive now. And like, how am I going to take care of like these basics? And, you know, oh, and now I've got to like add like getting them this help. Like, and I think there's also a piece that I wanted to name of, you know, when we're dealing with our kids, it sometimes I think I've noticed in like my own circles of friends, like it can be harder to reach out for support in some of these things because we're trying to protect our kiddos' right to privacy. And we want to maybe not share all of our kids' like own struggles and what they're going through because, you know, they have a right to privacy too. And so that may limit the support that we can get from places that we may normally get support. So how, again, like, I wish I like had a more clear cut answer of like how we solve this problem, but I just want to name that like just surviving right now and like coming off the pandemic and the challenges that presented and the ways our kids are like adjusting from that and like the increased pressures on mental health that, you know, that presented for all of us. Like, again, don't really have an answer beyond like, I just want to name that like this whole process can be overwhelming in the best of circumstances, but it's really challenging. And if you're at home trying to support a kiddo and then trying to do all the things outside of that, I just want to name it, can be really hard and challenging.
Well, what I take away from both of your answers is maybe the starting point is we just have to breathe first.
Yeah.
Just take a collective moment to sit down and just breathe. I think what gives fits and starts to these conversations, and why I'm so grateful to be having them with people like you, is this is not straightforward. There are not a one size fits all solution. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing playing out systemically is, when we talk about the integration of the brain body connection and recognizing that we all have mental health because we have a brain, how it manifests may not be the same as what a heart attack looks like in in a certain person or persons. They're different. And even as you testified here today, testified's the wrong word, acknowledged today, I mean, the differences in your kids with the same diagnosis, that I think is the heart of why these conversations have failed to go further faster, because they are so different in each person. And I think, just being able to show up and navigate kind of the ups and downs, and, being vulnerable, being able to say, I don't have the answer, or being able to acknowledge that maybe I wasn't my best in that situation. I think, like anything in life, I mean, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, that goes a long way in just showing up in your own humanness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there
Jayme,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you commented that you love the title of the podcast.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what the term "nobody's perfect" means to you?
Yeah. So I just love that because I think it's something that I always think of what am I unlearning and what am I learning? Because I think, we have a lot to unlearn sometimes. So I'm unlearning like the expectations of perfection, and I'm learning how to exist in like my own humanness and like what that means of, being a whole person is not going to be, it's going to be the ups, it's going to be the downs, it's going to be making mistakes and learning for them, and then oftentimes getting it right and like celebrating the times that we get it right. So I think nobody perfect, to me, it just encompasses the idea that we can live like a full life that's full of ups and downs and challenges and strengths, and just taking all of that in and embracing all of it.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
I love that. And I want to thank you both for being here today and sharing your experience, strength, and hope. I mean, I know there is, in our shared humanness, there is some growth opportunity and learning opportunities just in what we go through a normal course of life. So thank you both for being here today. And thank you for listening and being a part of Nobody's Perfect, a community dedicated to supporting, inspiring, and empowering youth and families. We hope you've enjoyed this transformative conversation today. Together, we're dismantling stigma and providing solutions for the mental health and well-being challenges we all can encounter. Be sure to join us every other week on cozy101.com/imperfect to continue embracing our shared human experience. I'm your host, Jason Hopcus, and it's been a pleasure having you here. Stay connected, stay inspired, and remember, nobody's perfect, because perfection isn't real. Your story is. Until next time.